Recording.
You ready?
I am.
Okay. It is 7 o'clock. I would like to call the August 15th DeSoto City Council meeting to order. We'll start with roll call, please.
Lane,
Here.
Daniels,
Here.
Michael,
Here.
Ritter,
Here.
Murdoch.
Here.
Thank you, council. Everyone's present.
Okay. I would invite you all to please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Our first item tonight is an employee recognition, but Cameron is not here tonight, so we are going to postpone this to a meeting when Cameron can be here to be recognized. So moving on to our next item, a public hearing on the DeSoto 2020 budget.
Yes, council. This budget we've been working on more or less since February. This is the last step in the budget adoption process. We've called for a public hearing on the budget tonight. I do have a quick PowerPoint presentation I included in your packets. I'll go through this relatively quickly. I don't intend to spend a lot of time on this. Stop me anytime you have a question, or for any member of the audience that's interested in any particular aspect, we can answer questions as well. So we do need to hold the public hearing, so I'll kind of give the overview synopsis of the budget. You'll open the public hearing, close the public hearing, and then the actual adoption will take place later on in the agenda. We have an item for that this evening. So, as we know, 2020 budget is set. I know I'm breaking the first rule of PowerPoint presentations by putting too many numbers up here on the screen at once, but this is kind of the first thing that appears in our budget document. It's just the summary of the overall funds. Basically, we've got a handful of main funds we work through: general fund, water fund, sewer fund, refuse, police, and debt service. There's also capital improvements. So on this sheet, we just kind of summarize the budgeted revenues and budgeted expenses for each one of those funds. And also, keep in mind these budgeted expenses are often routinely higher than our actual expenses for each one of these funds. Of course, by law, we can't exceed the budget, so it's very typical to have this budget amount be actually above what we actually intend to spend. So for 2020 in the general fund, we've got budgeted revenues of $4.3 million. That's compared to about the same last year. Budgeted expenses of $5.26 million compared to last year at $4.58. And you can see the other funds there: water and sewer fund. Water funds about 1.7 in revenues, 1.9 in expenses. Sewer funds a little smaller, 650,000 in revenues and 712 in expenses. To start the budget process, we always start looking at property valuations. So for 2019, which is the valuation set that we set our 2020 mill levy on, we had an assessed valuation for the city of about 6.7% increase over 2018. And that was also about a 5 to 6% increase over the year before. So steady valuation increases. Important in that 6.7% is the division between what is new construction and what is just increased valuations, because that factors into our cap, our mill levy cap. In this case, I don't have it on the slide, but it's about 2.5% new construction of that 6.7%. So most of it is just increased property valuations, but a good percentage is new construction, new homes, new businesses coming to town. This is how the assessed valuations have looked the past several years. So the red bar are the overall valuations. The vast majority of that's made up of actual real property. There's also personal property, and we also assess the utilities that operate in town. So you can see just a steady increase from about 66 million in 2017 to 82.8 82.8 million for 2020. On the mill rate picture, then, when we look at our revenues that we need to generate from the mill rate, I've got these broken down from 2017 to 2019. Overall, total mill rate for that's included in this budget is 24.195 for the city. That's down slightly from last year, which is also down from the year before. So we've got steady decreases from 2017, and that's just shown graphically here. The total mill levy is comprised of general fund, law enforcement fund, and debt service. Those are the three funds we levy a mill for, and you can see how those break out. So a steady decline, and this is kind of where you see the result of the property tax lid. We are, of course, under the property tax lid. We didn't have to call a special vote of the residents to increase that, but even though our assessed valuations are going up, mill levy's going down. We had a number of policy directives that we discussed throughout the spring and summer in the budget. The main ones here I'll just touch on a little bit. Economic development, we are making a concerted effort to put more reserves, more effort into our economic development efforts. We're increasing our contribution to the EDC from $35,000 to $55,000 next year. So that's something we decided we wanted to invest in. The vehicle and equipment replacement program, this is, I think it's a fourth year, maybe it's only the third. For this program, essentially, this rolling process of renewing our rolling stock and contracting equipment. For 2020, we've got 3 things in the street department, one pickup truck, a 5-yard dump truck, and then a new backhoe lease. And then the water department is actually getting 3 new utility trucks, just pickup trucks. All of these are replacing existing equipment, which we will, by policy, auction off on the Purple Wave website. And that money goes back into the program to help fund new equipment in future years. Another thing we did in the 2020 budget that we hadn't done before are these building maintenance and asset management funds. We've got one for this building here. We've got a separate one for the pool out back. We've got a separate one for the water department and the last one for the sewer department. The idea here is that these are funds that survive year to year, so they don't zero out at the end of the year. But money we put in them and don't use them in one year, we can use for the next. And we understand that the full kind of asset management concept, especially for the water and the sewer department in general, these amounts, yearly amounts, aren't quite enough. They probably aren't half enough. But it will start us down the path of implementing truly asset management programs for these. And this is things like, in the simplest sense, we need to be replacing a certain amount of water lines every year because they wear out. Pumps and equipment at the treatment plants, that sort of a thing. For this building, that air conditioning unit that sits out there is going to need replaced someday. And so, all of those things, to be able to take a more comprehensive look at that multiple years into the future. On the capital improvement side, we do have programmed into the budget $750,000 in new debt. That's just in the budget. We'll take a closer look at that at the end of the year, see where the CIP fund sits. For the projects next year, a lot of design work. So we're going to be designing Miller Park drainage. We'll be designing a sewer extension along 95th Street, and we'll be designing a roundabout improvement at Lexington and 91st Street. We'll also be doing some improvements to City Hall and the sidewalk program. So that's the kind of the policy highlights. The other big part of our budget, in addition to, there's kind of 3 main revenue sources. One's the mill levy. Another one is franchise fees from our utility providers. And then the last big one is the sales tax. And we talk quite a bit about estimating where the sales tax number is going. It's been pretty steady for DeSoto. It's not quite as fickle as other communities might be, who might rely a lot heavier on sales tax. But in 2018, we had quite a spike in the sales tax, kind of an unexpected spike, and so our general fund balance went significantly up. The 2019 budget is kind of designed to spend down some of that year-end balance, and then looking forward to 2020, we want to be conservative with the sales tax estimates, but not so conservative that we collect money that we don't spend. So that's kind of the line we're drawing here. This chart represents what what's programmed into the budget next year, but then also into our 5-year projections. So everything up until 2018 is an actual number. So you see the spike in 2018. The 2019 number on this chart is what we have budgeted for this year. And then moving out are the projected numbers. So this dot right here in 2020 is the number that's included in our budget. The blue line I've drawn in here at the top, this blue dot here represents where we think the sales tax collection is going to wind up this year. And I think I reported, I think in the last council report to you that we received an unexpected tax windfall of about $180,000 as a result of an audit that was done on Huhtamaki dating back to 2013. That was a one-time deal. It had to do with internet sales and sales tax collections from that. But so it was in June that we got that slug of unexpected sales tax revenues. So the actual line might be up closer to where that blue line is, but still for the budget for next year, we're going to go with that dot right there. I think it's relatively conservative. And I think you've seen. I think the Star had an article about sales tax collections and the whole dark store theory at the county level. As far as dark store, now that I've mentioned it, we've had the county appraiser give us an analysis on what impact DeSoto might see from that. We don't have big box retailers, so our liability there is pretty limited. Several $1,000s, $4, $5, maybe $10,000 it could mean to us in the future if that whole dark store scenario plays out in favor of the retailers who are objecting to the tax collections. So these next charts just show year-end fund balances and kind of show the long-term philosophy of why we budget, how we budget. Essentially, really what we try to do is maintain a healthy fund balance in the general fund, and that usually represents about 30 to 40% of your yearly annual operating revenues. We have a financial policy that says that's going to be what we target. So this chart shows the spike in 2018, shows the spending down in 2019, also additional spend down in for the next several years, so that our year-end fund balance as a percent of operating revenue normalizes towards that 30 or 35%. This is the long-term plan. So when you see our budget has more expenditures than revenues, this is kind of why. That's on purpose. The philosophy here is we don't want to collect more tax than we need. We want to spend the tax that we collect. Here's the long-term trend on law enforcement fund. It's a little bit less directed toward that percentage rate. This shows actually the mill rate in law enforcement fund. With the law enforcement fund, there's not a whole lot of need for reserves year to year because there's not a lot of unexpected expenses that could happen in any given year. So this chart just shows the mill levy basically remaining flat and actually decreasing. And the way these year-end fund balances project toward the end of this projection, we would probably, if this continued to happen, we would lower this mill rate further in the out years. Water fund, same thing. Water fund had a really good year in 2018. Was a really hot year. We sold a lot of water that year, and it was after the improvements that we did. We spent $7 million upgrading that facility, and that created a lot of efficiencies in pumping and operations and water loss, things like that. So the fund balance had been increasing very steadily since really since 2015. This year's budget will spend that down a little bit, and the proposed budget has that further so that we can normalize this percentage toward that 30 or 40%. Sewer fund is kind of the same way, but it's a little bit less defined. Sorry, I failed to reference on the water fund. Then 2020 expenses 1.9 million. That's compared to 1.8 million last year. You can see the revenues projecting just slightly under that, a 5.8% increase in the revenues. We do have programmed in a 1.8% increase in the water rate. We won't do that till the first of the year, and we might not do it at all. It's kind of a placeholder at this time, but the 1.8 really just represents an inflationary type of commodity inflation type of an increase. And it's the same story in the water fund. We have a 2% rate increase programmed into the budget, but we'll take a closer look at those toward the end of the year and decide whether or not we need to implement those increases. That was the end of my presentation. So I'll answer any questions anybody has, and we should open the public hearing.
Any questions for Mike on the presentation? If not, all right, I'm going to officially open the public hearing on the 2020 budget. Anyone from the audience wish to speak regarding the budget? Okay, seeing none, I close the public hearing. Good. And then we'll act on this later in the meeting.
Yeah.
All right, our next item is an executive session to discuss personnel candidates for the communications position. So Mike, you want to?
Just by way of introduction. Sure. So tonight we have the three finalists. Mark, Whitney, and Renee are all in the audience. And my thought was, because it's a personnel issue, we'll convene into executive session, and then Lana will direct in alphabetical order the candidates just for an introduction, kind of a first impression introduction, and just some discussion just to get to know them a little bit. Just kind of wanted the council to get a feel for at least the last three. We had a great pool of candidates. It was really hard to whittle them down to three. So just have that discussion and get whatever input from the council that you care to give, or whatever questions you have for our three finalists.
30 minutes?
Take maybe 5 or 10 minutes each. 30 minutes ought to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
What time is it?
7:18.
7:18. All right, I'd like to make a motion. We recess into executive session at 7:19 for 30 minutes to discuss non-elected personnel pursuant to KSA 754319B1, with the open meeting resuming in the City Council chamber at 7:49 p.m.
We have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Yeah, I will. I'm going to stop the recording.